Let's talk to Professor Antonios Tzanakopoulos, who is Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry we kept you waiting a little bit. The question of international law naturally rears its head on occasions like this. Unless you are a lawyer, it's quite difficult to get your head around what is permissible under international law and not. And I spent quite a long time last night trying to read up on this. But just tell us from your point of view how you interpret the international law in this case, in these attacks on Iran.
Well, I think the position is very clear. There's absolutely no justification for the use of force in this case on the part of the United States and Israel. According to the Charter of the United Nations, according to customary international law, the use of force is only allowed if it is authorized by the Security Council, which it clearly isn't in this case, or if it is in self-defense, for which you require an armed attack occurring. Now, of course, there are interpretations that say this may extend to situations where the armed attack is absolutely imminent. But of course, the question of imminence is a question of fact. But this is interpreted generally very, very narrowly. And in any case, it doesn't appear that here there was any attack imminent on the part of Iran, either against Israel or against the United States. If anything, they were still engaged in negotiations in Oman up until the point where the use of force started. So the position in international law is pretty clear as to there being no justification in this case. And I wonder if you've come across any positions that say this is actually justified under international law and on what basis.
Well, there are quite a few people who think it is justified. But Mark Carney...
Could you name a few? Mark Carney is not a lawyer.
No, nor am I. Nor am I, which is why I asked you the question. But can you name how many wars have been basically given approval by the United Nations since 1949?
Oh, very many. Since 1945, I think. Fine.
Three.
Oh, no, you're very wrong. We had authorizations for the use of force in the former Yugoslavia. We've had authorization for the use of force in Libya. We've had authorization for the use of force in Kuwait, and we've had more limited authorizations for the use of force in all sorts of other situations.
The overwhelming majority of military attacks and wars have come without the auspices of the United Nations.
But they were justified as self-defense, even if they were wrong. At least they were justified on this. Well,
surely there is an argument here about self-defense, isn't there? Given that over the years,
no Article 51 letter has come into the Security Council as far as I'm concerned. If somebody is invoking the right to use force in self-defense, even Putin did that in the case of attacking Ukraine, sends an Article 51 letter to the Security Council where they explain why they're using force in self-defense. In this particular case, no such letter has come in. And as far as I've heard on the part of the US government, there has been very little attempt at justification of this, just like as there has been very little attempt at justification of the use of force in Venezuela, which is equally unlawful, just taking the last.
So you don't believe that Iran has been a clear and present danger to both the United States and Israel over the years?
A clear and present danger is not the standard of the law. The standard of the law, in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, is that a state has the right to use force in individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. That is what the letter of the law says. Now, we can interpret occurs more broadly as an attack being imminent, which means the process, the sequence of events that will inevitably lead to an armed attack unless there is an interception has been put in motion. But it doesn't say you are allowed to bomb whoever is a clear and present danger, because there's all sorts of states that are clear and present dangers for all sorts of other states, whether you take Greece and Turkey or you take I don't know, whatever other situation. You could say Russia, US. I mean, is not Russia a clear and present danger to the US? They're not bombing them. I mean, it has been a clear and present danger for ages. How long has it had nuclear weapons aimed at the US? So if the standard is clear and present danger, which is not the standard of the law, then we'd basically be in a jungle.
So you don't believe that Iran has been a clear and present danger to Israel over the last 12 months, for example?
I've answered this. It's not, you're asking me if I believe. It's not what I believe. If you're asking me what the standard of the law is, the standard of the law is not a clear and present danger.
Well, sometimes the law is an ass, isn't it?
Well, I mean, then that's if you're welcome to that position if that's what you feel. But of course, if you're asking me what the standard of the law is, then I have to tell you what the standard of the law is. Now, whether we can sit here and criticize it, we can do that if you wish. But let's separate the two questions, one from the other. So if you would rather take this up on policy, I mean, I can do that. I have no special expertise on policy. My expertise is on the law.
A lot of people, I think, in Iran, not everybody, but I think a lot of the population, particularly those who supported the January protests, they will take the view that the law international law hasn't protected them over the years. And maybe we should start thinking about people rather than laws.
I mean, yes, of course we could do that, but of course international law is made by states and it is meant to be there to protect states, not necessarily directly the people. That's again a criticism that you can level, but that has to do with how the system is structured, because of course we're talking about the protection of people. Then you could take up the issue that you have with Iran with all sorts of other states around the world, which the United States is not currently bombing, where people are suffering. So it becomes a little bit more complicated. So if you want to have a law that protects people, that's fine, but then you would have to be intervening to protect the people everywhere, which is not, of course, what the United States is doing, or anybody else for that matter. So international law, the characteristic is particularly this, that it has been created by states. The states are the lawmakers. The states are the primary subjects of that law. And the law is created to protect them, in particular from intervention and from the use of force. With respect to people, there are human rights obligations that apply. When those human rights obligations are being violated, there are all sorts of reactions that states can take. But these do not include the use of armed force. So this kind of attempt of bombing from high altitude to protect human rights has not served us very well. It has been taken in the past. It hasn't served us very well. Again, there we could stray into question of policies, Mr. Dale. But if the previous history is anything to go by, then high altitude bombing hasn't really protected human rights.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Professor Antonios Tzanakopoulos, Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford. I'm not advocating that anybody should go deliberately against international law, but sometimes, I think particularly in matters of self-defence, I do think that individual countries are allowed to make sure that attack is maybe take preemptive action to prevent an attack. And I think that is what Donald Trump would argue that he's doing here. I think there is a clear and present danger to Israel. We've seen it over the past, decades with Iran funding Hezbollah and Hamas to send rockets into Israel and kill people. I think Israel is completely justified. But even I would accept that there is a debate over whether the American action is.